Hi, everyone. Welcome to another session of ProductTank New York. Very excited to be with you here today. My name's Guy Armstrong Waters, co-organizer of ProductTank New York. This is part of Mind the Product, which is one of the world's largest community of product peoples. We're very focused on bringing the community together, focused on as many learnings as we can gain and knowledge we can gain. And today we're building on that. We're fortunate enough to be here with Jackie Bavaro, prior head of product at Asana and author of Cracking the Product Management Interview, and now Cracking the PM career career. Today we'll be learning about what it takes to succeed as a product manager. Jackie will be diving into that. I'll hand over to Jackie in a moment, but just a heads up, you can post questions either on the StreamYard page or the YouTube page. If you post them, I'll moderate them. When we get to the end, we'll do a bit of Q&A. Hope you enjoy it, and let's dive into it. Jackie, I'll hand over to you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. All right, let's get started. So I was going to talk today about what it takes to succeed as a product manager. And if any of you would like to follow up with extra questions afterwards or stay in touch, my Twitter handle right over here is the best way to reach me. So I got started in product management right out of undergrad. I was lucky enough to have a friend kind of push me into the role, tell me that I ought to apply even though I didn't know what the role was. And that's how I got my first internship at Microsoft. From there, I was able to move over to Google when I moved from Seattle to New York. And Microsoft didn't have any PM jobs at the time. So that's when I applied to Google. I got rejected the first time, and I applied again a year later. While I was at Google, I was reached out to by a coworker from Microsoft who told me about his new startup. And that was when I learned about Asana, and I was lucky enough to move over as the first PM and grow with the company as we scaled the company. I was there for over 8 years, leading a team of over 20 PMs. And while I was there, I wrote my first book, and a little bit over a year ago, I stopped to work on this new book, Cracking the PM Career. So I wanted to dive into a few topics about what I've learned about being a successful PM. So one of the early experiences I have that really shaped how I thought about product management was a time when my designer came to me and she said, "Jackie, you're taking away the fun part of my job. You keep coming to me with these wireframes you've done and telling me to do my design magic on them. But what I want you to do is I want you to bring me problems, not solutions." And that statement of that the PM should really be owning problems and not solutions really shaped how I think about product management. We are the role that's responsible for starting with the goals, defining what the problem looks like, and really figuring out what does success look like for this area. That's the unique value that we're able to bring. And in many of the roles that we have, we don't necessarily get handed a problem to choose from. Instead, what usually we see are lists of features. So a customer might come to you with a request of saying like, "Hey, please build this feature." But sometimes even an executive will stop you in the hallway and say, "Hey, I know you're working on this. Can you build this for me?" And a lot of PMs and me in my early career took that as like, "Okay, great. I better run with it. The VP wants this. I'm going to go ahead and build it." And I one time came to my team and I said, "Hey, the vice president wants us to build this feature. Isn't that exciting? He cares what we're working on." And what I quickly learned is that the other people on my team did not care that this was a feature requested from a VP. Instead, what I learned I'm supposed to do with these is when you're handed a feature, it's the product manager's job to reverse engineer the problem. It's our job to go up a level from the feature that we were asked for to understand what's the underlying goals and problems why somebody asked for this feature. And when we're able to abstract it, we're then able to open up the space to explore other solutions and come up with even better answers. So by focusing on owning the problems rather than solutions and empowering the engineers and designers on our team to drive the solutions, that gives us the time and the space we need to be able to scale ourselves. And that ends up being a key skill in being able to have enough time to go expand into strategic work. The next thing I learned was about the importance of validating your ideas. And I used to think that the best PMs were the ones who came up with the best ideas. And this is sort of what it's like in the PM interviews. You're supposed to come up with all of the great ideas. But what I've learned in my own time and from working with many, many great PMs is that even the best PMs are wrong a lot of the time. Even the best PMs will run A/B tests that fail, and they will come up with designs that don't work in the user work with their designers, come up with designs that don't work in the user sessions. And what really differentiates the okay PMs from the best PMs is that the best PMs are able to quickly validate their ideas. They double check them with real people, and then they learn from that validation. So they're able to build upon their ideas and quickly throw away the ideas that don't work and iterate their way towards better ideas that will work. There have been many times when I've talked to people from different teams where version 1 of the experiment failed, and version 2 of the experiment failed, version 3 failed, and then version 4 was a wild success. And they were able to take all the elements of what they learned in those first 3 versions to come up with something that made continual progress and got them to something that would really be successful. The next one is about like how you develop your product sense. So PMs don't need to be born with creativity. A lot of of the creativity that product managers use, and a lot of what comes into creating successful products, is really studying great products everywhere. Studying great products, whether they're from gaming to e-commerce to healthcare apps, and really finding the best from everywhere and finding ways to apply it to the product that you're currently working on. So an example I like to use here is that user-generated videos have existed for a long time, and algorithmic home pages and feeds have existed for a long time. But you combine the two of those together and you get TikTok, which feels very fresh and creative because of the way these two pre-existing features work together. So I definitely recommend that product managers spend time with this. And an approach that works really well is called a product teardown. That's when you can get together with a group of other product managers. Every week you pick another great product to use. And what you can do is with the rest of your friends and coworkers or colleagues, you can really try to analyze and assess what makes this product work. So there might be a million reasons, a million mistakes they've made, a million things they've done wrong. But if the product is still successful, how do they manage to overcome all of the problems and be as successful as they are? What's working from it? What are the good elements that you might be able to take and learn from and later on apply to one of your own products? The next thing I wanted to talk about was stakeholder management. And one of the things that I think many PMs, including me, struggled with early in our career is how do you work with all these different stakeholders that seem to have different competing goals, and like how are you ever going to come to a compromise where you all agree? And what I've learned is that stakeholder management isn't really so much about compromise. It's about understanding your stakeholders, respecting them, seeing where they come from, and being able to use that deep understanding of the other person to come up with solutions that will work for both of you. When you work at the same company as your stakeholders, even if it seems like you're that you have competing goals, you're still working together in service of a higher mission, of a higher level of the same shared company mission. And so you do have something in common. You just have slightly different perspectives on how to approach it. So what I found works really well is to figure out if your disagreement is one of 3 types. It could be about different information. So maybe they have seen a new report that you haven't seen yet, and you can just share your information back and forth, and then you'll be on the same page. Or you could have a disagreement because you have different assumptions. So maybe I think that this design will work better, and you think that design will work better. And that's a place where you can validate those assumptions, try to come up with a cheap way to show those sketches to somebody else, or run a quick A/B test, or look up some data to be able to have a good guess of how to move forward. And the most interesting kind is the third kind, which is a disagreement based on values. So this might be that I think it's important to increase user growth, and you think it's important to increase revenue. Or I think it's really important to take risks and make big bets and move forward in big leaps, and you think it's important to be a little bit more conservative and not take big risks and not take a risk of upsetting our customers. And what I found works really well is when you have a disagreement on values, what you really have is a disagreement on strategy. And if you frame it as a strategic discussion rather than a discussion about the actual decision at hand, a lot of times that will unlock the right kinds of conversations to have to come to an agreement. And other times what you'll find is when you frame this as a strategic discussion, you'll find that you don't have the right people in the room to make that strategic discussion. The strategic decision. So then it might illuminate which people ought to be in the room and included in that conversation to gain strategic alignment. Decide, is it more important for our company to go after growth or revenue right now? And once you've made that strategic decision, the specific decision you were discussing becomes much easier to decide. Now I want to move on and talk about the product management careers. What I have learned is that there's 3 distinct phases in a PM's career. And when I was a new PM, I thought that stripping product was all there was. And I assumed I'd get better and better and better at it. And someday I would be CEO. And what I learned is that's not how it works at all. So in the first phase of your career, being a great PM means shipping great products that delight customers and hit the goals. And you get better and better and better at that. But at some point, you'll start to plateau and have trouble expanding your influence. And that's because you need to move into the second phase, which is product strategy. And here, you're not just designing products that hit the goals, but you're the one who's deciding what those goals ought to be. You are identifying new opportunities and coming up with winning strategies to win those opportunities and win over those market segments. And you can get better and better and better at product strategy. And it's a long phase, so there's a lot of room to grow here. But at some point, especially once you move into people management, you'll find that, again, you start to plateau because the job has changed again. And to get into really the highest levels of product leadership, it's a new kind of job. It's organizational excellence. And being a great product leader is not just about shipping great products and creating great product strategies, but rather about creating a great team and a strong organization that can successfully and reliably ship great products with winning product strategies. So the work that you do as a product leader in this organizational excellence phase includes a lot about creating a strong organization. So this is things like hiring, recruiting, coaching and development, setting up team processes, which is something that a lot of PMs aren't immediately interested in, but really finding the ways to get all the people on your team to work as effectively and efficiently as they can. And about half of your job is looking down to create the strong organization. And the other half of your job is looking up to help your entire company and your entire organization to succeed. So this is really about being a strategic advisor to the other senior leaders at your company, and having a broader perspective on not just how do I make my team successful, but how do I make the whole company successful. So I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into product strategy. And many PMs will at some point in their career be told they need to be more strategic. But what does that mean? So what I found is that there's 3 distinct parts of a product strategy. And when you have all 3 together, you have a complete strategy. And you can create one of these product strategies anytime you're responsible for a team that's going to do more than one related project after another. So if you're an intern, you probably can't create a product strategy because you just own a single project. But anytime that you are responsible for a whole team, you can create a strategy that will be aligned to the strategies above you. They're sort of connecting the dots in a pyramid of strategies all the way working up to the whole company strategy. So first part of the product strategy is your product vision. This is your inspirational picture of what the future could be like. And when I create a product vision, I really like to treat it like an infomercial. So I talk about the pain. It's so hard. People at companies today spend so much time in work about work, wasting time in endless status updates. But there's a better way. Imagine a future where as you check tasks off your to-do list, they automatically update the centralized dashboard, which automatically assesses, how your projects are going, where the bottlenecks are, and make smart suggestions on how to keep your projects on track. And once you're able to draw out this inspiring vision of the future, you can use it in a few ways. You can use it to recruit people to your team. You say, look what we want to build. Don't you want to come here and help me build this? You can use it to motivate the people that are already on your team, saying look at this future we're working towards. The work you're doing is so meaningful. And don't we want to, aren't you glad that we get to work together towards this future? You can use it to validate the vision with customers. You show it to them, and if their reaction is I'm not that excited about it, it's a good sign you need to keep iterating on your vision. And you can also show it to executives to advocate for spinning up new teams and going after new visions that don't already have any resourcing. So you've got your vision. Next part is the strategic framework. And this is really where you lay out what are the big bets that you're making to win a marketplace. So who is your target customer? And like get really specific here. Like, are you going after, all knowledge workers? Are you going after people who are using a specific competitor product? Are you going after people who don't use any of your competitor products but are shopping around for them? And then you can really lay out your product pillars. What are the key themes that you think will be important to win this marketplace? So for example, when we were building Asana early on, we talked about Asana as your team brain. And your team brain would, one pillar was know all the information about your work. And we would describe that in detail and what success would look like. Your team brain needs to draw insightful connections between all the information it knows. So then we would lay out, our initiatives underneath that. And then we'd say your team brain has to always be with you. So you need to have it on different mobile devices and different browsers. And we would lay out our strategy around that. And I like to think, one way I like to think about the strategic framework is I like to sort of preemptively imagine what kind of pushback I'm going to get. What are the different stakeholders who are going to be asking me to build something different, and try to preemptively make sure that my strategic framework has laid out the reasoning for what work we're going to do and what work we won't do. And so, for example, I might be like, oh yes, that thing you're asking for, that belongs as part of phase 5 of our strategic framework. And right now we are on phase 2. So once we get to phase 5, then we can start discussing that kind of those kinds of features. And then the third part of your product strategy is the roadmap. And your strategic roadmap is not a commitment, but rather it's an outline working backwards from your vision to today to see what would it take? What size steps do you need to take to be able to achieve your vision in a reasonable amount of time? And a lot of times what happens most frequently is you draw out your roadmap and it becomes very clear that if you work at the current pace that you're working at and you're taking on the size project you're taking on and they take as long as they currently do to build, that there's no way you're going to achieve your vision in the next 3 years or next 5 years. And so it often is the wake-up call you need to understand what size of project, how ambitious do we need to be able to make meaningful progress towards our vision. The roadmap is also incredibly useful for planning ahead because it can help you understand, like, do we need to hire people with certain specialties, or do we need to expand the team size to be able to properly invest a few years from now? So once people understand what a product strategy is, the top thing I hear is like, how will I ever have time to do all of that? And what I found works really well is that if you've been on a team for a while, you have a lot of these strategic ideas floating around in your head. You've been going to customer sessions and you've heard pain points and you've heard feature requests. So often what it takes to kind of get this started is to block off a day or half a day on your calendar just to sit by yourself and start drafting your ideas up. And you can start with any of these 3 areas, but just start writing things down so you have something written on paper. And once you have that written down, then you can start showing it to the other leaders on your team. So, your design lead, your eng lead, and start discussing with them and collaborating with them on what the strategy should be, but you're not starting from a blank piece of paper anymore. And a lot of times people say like, oh, I don't know that I could possibly avoid my team for a whole day or half a day. And the mental leap that I think sometimes works well here is like, imagine you had a doctor's appointment, or imagine your friend was getting married and like you had to take a Friday off if you needed to. So imagine it's something like that and really turn off your notifications, block off the time, make sure you like check your inbox beforehand, or promise yourself you'll check it at the end of the time so that you don't get distracted by that. And if the first time you try blocking off that time on your calendar doesn't work, try it again. So it's not always easy to protect that time, but building up that practice of really protecting some chunks of big time for that strategic thinking ends up being a really effective way to get product strategy work kicked off. So I wanted to dive just a little bit deeper into the roadmap. So a good roadmap is like a good charcuterie board. And what I mean by that is that a great charcuterie board has a mixture of meats and cheeses and fruits. It has a balance of all of those. And when you're putting together a charcuterie board, you don't need to stack rank every piece of meat against every piece of cheese. Instead, you can at a high level think, what balance do I want of each of these? And then pick the best meats and pick the best cheeses and pick the best fruits. you can apply that same thinking to your roadmap. So rather than creating a single file roadmap where, you know, the top features that the sales team wants have to compete against the technical debt that the engineering team wants, and then have to compete against features for growth and features for revenue and features that the publishing team wants. Instead, you can, at a high level, think strategically about how large of an investment you want in each of these different goals. And that's a strategic discussion to be had as part of that strategic framework. And once you've decided, for example, like, yes, we should definitely have 10% of our engineering effort be dedicated towards technical investments and technical debt, then when you actually fill out the roadmap, you can have discussions with the appropriate stakeholder for each bucket. So, for example, the engineering lead really gets to drive what are the most important and impactful technical investments to make, whereas you can work directly with the people on the sales team on what are the best features to add for our current sales targets. It really lets you sort of address the goals and the needs of each group separately, while separating it from this conversation of how big of a percentage should it be. And that makes by separating those two separate decisions, it makes these conversations a lot easier. And it lets you come to better results that don't over-optimize for like a particular group. And then my final thing I wanted to talk about was partnering with your manager on your career goals. So your manager is incredibly impactful in your career. They get to be the person who decides what projects you get allocated to, and they advocate for your promotions or for your raises. And so it's really important to form a strong relationship with your manager. And one of the ways that you can do this is by being thoughtful about your own goals and discussing it in a future-looking way with your manager. So what I recommend is say something like, you know, hi, I'd really like to become a senior PM someday. What do you recommend that I should be focusing on right now so that I'll be ready when the opportunity arises? And by framing it that way, you're able to invite your partner to be on your side, helping prepare you for this opportunity in the future, rather than being the person against you who's telling you like, no, you're not ready yet, be patient, like, nope, I can't give it to you. So if you bring them around to your side and really have them help you out on your career journey. It also helps to learn about their goals, because the same way that you can scale yourself by empowering your designers and engineers, a lot of times your manager will be able to scale themselves by empowering you with some of the work that they consider sort of tedious work, and for you would be a great strategic opportunity. So one of the things that really helped me in my career was when I started partnering with my manager on the vision and strategy for Asana. And at first, he really drove it, and I was just typing up the notes and putting the slides together and helping wordsmith the script that we used to tell the demo. And then the next year, I was able to be a little bit more influential, and I understood ththings a bit more, so I could give a little bit more pushback and really kind of help co-create it. And by the third year, he says, why don't you take a first stab at it, and I'll come back to you with feedback after you've tried the first draft. So I was really able to sort of apprentice my way into learning these techniques. And that worked really well because the things that I wanted to grow into were the things that he wanted to hand off. The final point here is this idea that it's really important to proactively share your work. So for any job, it's important to advocate for yourselves, and especially in product management, where our managers don't really see most of our great work. But the best way to self-advocate is in a collaborative way. So there's a template that works really well. It has 3 parts. It goes, here's a challenge I'm facing. Here's what I'm planning to do about it. What do you think? And by combining all 3 of those parts, you're able to share the interesting, challenging work you're working on. By saying, here's what I'm planning to do, you take ownership for it. You're not saying like, oh, what should I do about this challenge? But you're actually able to step up and say, okay, I'm going to own this. I know I'm responsible for coming up with a solution here. Let me tell you. And if you're very proud of what you've done, this is a chance to really brag and show off the good thinking you've done. And when you say, what do you think? They'll be like, sounds great. You know, thanks for letting me know. And if you feel unconfident, if you're earlier in your career and you're not sure what to do, by laying out how far you got along or what your best guess is of what you would do, you're able to get much more useful feedback, and you're able to get credit for the good thinking that you have already done. A lot of times when I work with people, they're not sure. I'm like, okay, like they're like, what should I do about this? And I'm like, well, what would you think? What's your plan? And the plan that they came up with is actually a great plan. It's sometimes the best plan doesn't sound that wonderful at first, but they actually had more inside them than they realized. So it really gives you a chance to kind of show off how far you've come. And then that final part of what do you think really turns this into a collaboration. And your manager will love to give you advice, and they love to be invited to give their advice. And that makes it so that when they do have, whether it's large or small improvements on your plan, that's just giving input into the plan you already created, rather than them having to come in and correct you because you did proactively ask for that input. So with all of that, that's all the prepared slides that I had, and I'd love to open it up for questions.
Thanks a lot for that, Jackie. I was writing notes, got some good knowledge out of that. I really appreciate it. I'll take a question from the audience first. So Flo Wolf was asking, can you give an example of a vision you've asked customers to validate?
Sure. So when we were building Timeline View for Asana, we basically had this hypothesis that when users were asking us for Gantt charts, that what they really wanted was a visual way to check if their project was on track and if things were and where the bottlenecks were. And then we had an idea for a different visualization that we thought could be better than Gantt charts. And so we put together a few slides and maybe a little walkthrough, just all paper prototype style things. And we would show this. We would, in sales calls, for example, or in customer success calls with current customers, we would walk them through it, and we would try to get them excited about it and see, like, was their reaction like, yeah, this sounds great. Like, yes, I would love that. Can I buy it now? Or was it going to be like, that's not really what I asked for. I asked for a Gantt chart. Can you give me a Gantt chart?
Okay. Yeah, interesting. I totally agree with the use of prototypes for just de-risking low-cost experimentation. It's always an interesting way to go. A question, or more of a statement from AG, but he said, in my opinion, it's important to empathize with our customers' pain points to begin with. So on the back of that, is there any sequence in terms of how you start attacking problems, whether it's starting with business goals or who the user is? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think that product discovery is an incredibly important part of product development. And I think it's the PM's responsibility to make sure we always do product discovery. And so product discovery is when you investigate and find out, like, what are the customer pain points that they have? What are all of the different problems out there that we could solve? You're really kind of going broad on the broad set of related problems that you could go after. In terms of where things start, I think that if you are committed to doing product discovery, it's okay that the initial seed of an idea came from anywhere. And I think that in reality, that this is sort of what happens, is that some seeds of an idea are a customer request where they ask for a specific feature. Some are a customer pain point that they told you or that you noticed when you were visiting them on site. Sometimes it starts from some visionary idea that, your founder, came up with in the shower and they tell it to you. Sometimes it comes from like a business goal where you're like looking at the numbers and you're like, oh no, we need to get costs down. So I think that the ideas can come from anywhere, but I do think that the reliable way to come up with successful products is to make sure that the products you're building are solving a real pain for customers, and not just like a pain for customers, but that the pain that you're solving for customers is big enough that it'll overcome that inertia of having to use a new product.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It's that idea of Peter Thiel talks about being 10 times better than your competition. And I was thinking about it the other day in terms of Spotify's strategy and features that they're building, and that the difficulty that they'd have of acquiring, Apple Music customers, because they're not 10 times better. So it speaks to the competitive landscape. Okay, what else have we got? Just to follow up from AG, what strategy do you think should be adopted when building products for internal customers within organization, and we have complex and and multiple dependencies?
Yeah. So so when you're building products for internal customers, it has a lot of shared benefits with building enterprise products or like B2B type products in that you can actually like get to talk to your customers and learn face to face what their real concerns are. And especially when they're internal customers, in a certain extent, they will be more open with you about what the real problems are, at least to the extent that they understand them. Then you won't always necessarily get that same degree of like honesty from other people, which is quite different than when you're in the consumer world. And you can't really like, Google can't always just like go out and ask somebody like, what are your top problems with search? Because there's billions of users. And so any number of people they get is just not going to be a representative sample. So when you're working on internal products, one of the key things that I found through my research and talking to lots of teams is that there can often be a bit of a tension with internal products in that sometimes the executive who spun up this internal product team and set them on their mission of like, you're going to build new tools for the journalists or whatever it is, like didn't always have full buy-in of the team that's getting asked to move to this internal product. So I think that PMs for internal products need to do like a higher than average amount of real customer empathy and really see it as their job, not just to build the product, but to help it be successfulully deployed and to make sure that its successful deployment is positive for the company. And so what I mean by that, for example, like a thing that I've seen a few times is an internal tools PM is building something to automatically answer some customer service tickets, let's say. And this is great, but what ends up happening is that it automatically answers the easiest customer tickets. And now the customer support reps are left with only the harder tickets to answer, which means that their job is now just like a click more stressful. And a lot of the metrics that they were currently being judged by, like how many tickets per hour can they go through, now they're going to look worse. It's going to look like they're performing worse because now they're handling a more difficult set of tickets. And so in a situation like that, I think it really is the internal PM's role to notice all of these complicating factors and advocate for solutions that will work well for the whole company. So that might mean like having part of the rollout plan of this new product mean changing the quotas for the support reps to make sure that all works well with them. Or if they're now going to have extra free time and now a big part of their job is being taken up, to really help them figure out like, well, what now would be work with them and their leads to say what would be a good use of their energy now that we're moving over. So I think like the ethical situations here are really important, and really thinking not just about shipping something, but about having that translate into goodness for the whole company and for all the people working there. I think ends up being really important when you're working on internal tools.
Okay. Prashant says, recently I've been reading that PMs should be listening to their developers more than their customers. Is this in your opinion, Jackie, is this a new trend, or what's your thoughts on that?
So I have not heard of this as a new trend. What I would say is that listen to your developers. So I think it's really important to form a strong relationship with your designers and your developers. I think that it's really critical for PMs to understand the technical implications of the technical decisions that engineers are making, and to be willing to ask questions until they're able to understand that. So you don't need a technical background, but you do need to be able to ask. And like if a engineer, an example I have in the book is that your engineer might say like, hey, does this need to show up in search? And you think they're asking like a really specific, narrow question. But it's a PM's responsibility to sort of notice that there might be something deeper there and say like, hey, what are the technical implications of that? And what they might say is like, oh, if it needs to show up in search, we are going to build it in this one approach. And if it doesn't, we're going to build it in an entirely new approach that saves us one day, but we can't get it in search. We won't have any privacy options. We won't have this or that or this. And then you might realize that what seemed like a little decision was actually a bigger decision with broader implications. So I do think it's really important to ask questions to understand those technical implications, and to form a strong relationship with your engineers. And if they disagree with you on something, to really respect them, treat them like a stakeholder, and ask and get to the bottom of it. Like, understand, like, if you are on different pages, why, and see if you can come up with something, some strategy that's aligned that can help you come on to better decisions. That said, I don't think I would ever trade off developers versus customers. I think that both of them are important. And when there are times when you really do have to do a trade-off, like, does the team work on technical debt or the customer-facing features? That's when I'd use that charcuterie board example and really decide what investment I want. And usually the investment in your technical debt should not be 0. 10 or 15% is usually common.
I think that all speaks to a degree of patience that you need as a product manager, because different people will come through to you with different opinions, and you've got such a busy schedule. And so you need to actually be able to create space to move that data point of what they've come to you with to what problem is that going after, for who, and how could it deliver impact, instead of just giving them a really hard no, or just brushing off their comment. So yeah, that's valuable learnings there. What do we have here on a scale out of 1 to 10? How important is pivoting?
I don't know how to answer this question on a scale from 1 to 10. I think that validating your ideas is important. Figuring out whether they're going to work or not, and I think learning from them is really important. So I've got a great story in the book about an example of a monetization experiment at Slack. And the team ran this experiment to put all users into a free trial of Slack, and it did terribly, totally failed. And they were like, I think I have an idea of what went wrong. And so they tried a different variant of the experiment, and it also totally failed. And the PM said, like, okay, now I really understand it. And now I've got an idea for what will definitely win. And the CEO was like, stop wasting time on that. And he was like, no, I have a really strong conviction. I learned a lot from these first 2 experiments, and I really believe there's something here. And he went on to run that 3rd experiment, and it was a gigantic win, one of the biggest that they'd had. And so in that particular case, persevering was really important. But the reason he was able to persevere is it wasn't just a random hunch. He had actually learned something from each of these prior experiments, and he had a new hypothesis that hadn't been tested and that had a lot of strong evidence towards it because of the way the other experiments had kind of pushed it in and kind of shaped that evidence. So in that particular case, I think that he was correct to not pivot. But I do think, so when you're stuck in this thing where the thing you're doing isn't working, you need to really sort of try to reason through it to see, is it not working because the idea itself is fundamentally flawed? Can we go back down to the core root assumption and see, can we validate or invalidate that most fundamental idea? And if that fundamental idea is invalidated, then yes, you've got to pivot. But if that fundamental idea checks out and has a lot of support for it, then you don't need to pivot your whole thing. You need to iterate on what you're working on.
Okay, so you're thinking, what I'm hearing is you've got to make sure you're going after the right problem, and that it's a case of experimenting with different ideas that could solve that problem, and then making sure you're kind of on the right sort of idea, right theme or area, and then progressively just iterate on that. And if you keep running into brick walls, just step back, reevaluate, could this idea actually be the right course to continue with?
Yeah. And there was something really nice. I've got Shashir Malhotra has this idea of eigen questions. I've got it in the book, but it's also online if you want to look it up. It's EIGEN, eigen questions. And it's this idea of finding what is the most fundamental question that we could answer of all the different things we're looking at that will, if we answer that, it will answer all of the other questions that are sort of downstream of it. So this idea of figuring out what's the key question we need to answer, that's a real PM talent. And that's what you need to do. So you've got your new product that you're working on, and you're like, oh, I don't know what pricing model we should use for it. And I don't know exactly which customer type. There's like 5 different customer types we could be going after. And there's 8 different new features we could be building next. A key PM skill is this analytical problem solving, about it, being able to add structure to that and decide what are the most fundamental problems, which are the most important ones that will let the rest of this fall out of here. And maybe there's 1 of them, and maybe there's 3 of them, but really narrowing in and then choosing which one's most important to validate first.
Okay. You spoke earlier about just dissecting various companies, various products to glean the most valuable information out of it. I was wondering, what do you consider to be the best resources for studying great products?
So I think there's a few different ways. I might get sources. So I think this product teardown is a really good way to do it. Some people I know do product teardowns on every new product that's top of Product Hunt. So I think that's like a nice way to get a constant stream of new products. I also think picking like the biggest competitor in your space, or the biggest player in each of these spaces, or ones that are really like interesting and well known. On my Twitter account, I've actually started curating a list of people to follow who like to tweet about product management. And a lot of the times, if there's a new product that's starting to get a lot of buzz, I'll try it out and investigate that one. So, for example, right now everybody's talking about Clubhouse, so that's an interesting one to go look through. Everybody's talking about NFTs, so that might be interesting to find a platform that sells NFTs and do a product teardown on that. But there's often some like buzz of like which products are getting spoken about a lot. And I like following that because if they're getting spoken about a lot, they're clearly doing something right. So they might be doing so much wrong, but there's got to be something. It gives you enough confidence that there's going to be something of value to find there.
If you're thinking about Twitter as a resource for gleaning information, how do you cut through the noise?
So I do think that having some curated lists can be really helpful. So those are just like a set of people that I follow, but there is going to be some noise. So how do I do it? I know that when I was new at Twitter, I had trouble with it. Like, I know that it took a little while until I got sort of in the flow of just knowing, of like being able to pattern recognize, to know which things I could scroll past very quickly and which things would have more content in them. But I do think that having a few key people who like tend to retweet the good stuff can be pretty helpful there.
Okay. On the back of that, are there any people you consider to be like the best thinkers, whether it be in companies or just people outside of companies?
Oh yeah, I mean, so many great people. For product management specifically, I mean, I really think that Shreyas Doshi is great. I think that Shashir Malhotra is great. I think that I think Lenny Rachitsky is wonderful. And then broadening outside of just PM for a second, I think Julie Zuo is great. She works on design. But there are a lot of really, really wonderful product thinkers out there. Teresa Torres is wonderful. I think there's a lot of people out there that I respect a lot.
And maybe yourself as well. Yeah. Well, Jackie, look, thank you so much for joining us. So again, everyone, this is on the back of her releasing her latest book on cracking the PM career. I've purchased it. I think it's a choose your own adventure. It's full of a lot of interesting information, and just it's just a terrific resource no matter where you are in your career. So again, Jackie, thank you very much for joining us today. Everyone, just a reminder, for this event, it'll be posted on YouTube. So if you wanted to share it with anyone, you can just send on the link to any of your colleagues. And we look forward to seeing you again next month for our next installment. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.